single dad disguises as a janitor in his billionaire mother's company to test who'd truly love him. The security guard's hand closed around his arm before he'd even set down the mop bucket. "Sir, I need you to step away from the elevator." Daniel Hale didn't argue. He never argued. He just looked down at his daughter's small hand gripping the hem of his gray uniform shirt, and he made himself smaller, the way he'd learned to over the last 6 weeks, the way a man learns to when the world has already decided in advance what he is. "Daddy," Lily whispered, "why is that man being mean to you?" Nobody in the marble lobby of Hale Industries knew that the 7-year-old girl clutching a janitor's sleeve was about to inherit one of the largest fortunes in the country. Nobody knew that the man being walked toward the door like a shoplifter had signed off on this building's construction budget himself, 4 years earlier, back when he still used his real name. And in exactly 19 days, every person watching this happen, including the woman standing frozen by the reception desk with a paper coffee cup halfway to her lips, would find out exactly who he was. By then, it would already be too late for some of them to take back what they'd said. What none of them could have guessed, not even Daniel himself, was that the little girl beside him would end up being the reason the truth came out at all, and that a folded letter tucked in the bottom of an old toolbox, written in handwriting he hadn't seen in 2 years, was about to change everything he thought this test was for. 6 weeks earlier, Daniel had not planned on becoming invisible. He'd planned on picking his daughter up from school, same as any Tuesday, and driving her home to the too-quiet penthouse they'd lived in since Rachel died. 2 years is not a long time to grieve a wife. It is, apparently, more than enough time for a mother to decide her son needs help. "You're disappearing into that office?" Eleanor Hale told him, sitting across from him in the sunroom where she still took her tea at 4 o'clock, a habit from a smaller life she never quite let go of. Behind her, framed photographs traced the whole arc of the company. A cramped Queens storefront in 1986, a groundbreaking in 1998, a ribbon cutting with a much younger Daniel standing stiffly beside her in an ill-fitting suit. "You work. You come home. You raise that little girl beautifully, Daniel, but you are not living." "I don't have time to live, Mother. I have a company to run and a daughter to raise alone." He said it flatly, the way he'd said it a dozen times before, hoping flatness would end the conversation the way it always used to. It didn't work this time. "Then let me ask you something." Eleanor set down her cup with the particular care of a woman who has learned that silence lands harder than volume. "If a woman fell in love with you tomorrow, would you ever really believe her? Or would some part of you always wonder if she saw the balance sheet before she saw you?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. His mother had built Hale Industries from a single architecture office in Queens, and she had spent 40 years learning to read the exact expression currently sitting on her son's face. "I watched every woman you dated after Rachel asked about the house in the Hamptons before she asked your daughter's name." Eleanor went on, quieter now. "I watched you sit through 4 dinners in 1 month, and I watched you get smaller every time. I'm not doing that to you again." That was how the arrangement began. 3 months, though it would never run the full course. A cleaning uniform, 2 sizes too big in the shoulders. A false name on a temporary employee file that only Eleanor and 2 sworn HR officers would ever see. No car service, no private assistant, no shortcuts, no warmer coat if the weather turned. And this was the part that made Daniel's chest tighten every time he thought about it. Lily would know. Because there was no version of this experiment he was willing to run without his daughter beside him. "She's 7, Daniel. She'll understand more than you think," Eleanor said. "Children always do. They're the only ones in any room who haven't learned yet to lie about what they see." What none of them counted on was how much Lily would end up steering the whole thing. Nor how much a small toolbox in the janitor's supply closet, one Daniel hadn't opened in years, would matter before the 3 months were through. If you've ever had to rebuild your life for the sake of your child, tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. The first week, nobody looked at him twice. Daniel pushed his cart down the 14th floor at 6 a.m. Past the design department, past the glass-walled conference rooms where junior executives rehearsed pitches to empty chairs, and he understood, in a way that 4 decades of privilege had never let him understand, exactly how a uniform erases a person from a room. He noticed the way people's eyes slid past him toward the elevator numbers, The way conversations continued at full volume the moment he entered, as if his presence had no more weight than the cart's rusted wheel. Ryan Cole, the sales director with a corner office and an even bigger appetite for Eleanor's approval, made a habit of stepping around Daniel's cart without breaking stride, the way you'd step around a delivery pallet. Once, when Daniel didn't move fast enough, Ryan muttered, "Some of us have real jobs. Loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to deny later." Another morning, he let a door swing shut directly into the cart, sending a stack of folded towels to the floor, and didn't so much as glance back. Sophia Grant from communications was subtler about her cruelty. She referred to him, within easy earshot, as the new guy with the mop, a phrase she used so casually it never occurred to her that he understood every syllable. Once, in the break room, she told a colleague she just felt bad for people like that, honestly. In the same tone she might have used to describe a stray dog. Only one person on the 14th floor greeted Daniel the same way every single morning, whether his hands were full of trash bags or empty. "Morning," said Emma Reyes, head of the interior design team, balancing 2 coffees and a folder of blueprints against her hip. "You want the good coffee? The machine up here is actually decent, unlike whatever they've got downstairs." Daniel almost said no out of habit. Then he caught himself and said thank you instead, the way a person says thank you when someone has just done something small and real for no reason at all. By the second week, it wasn't just coffee. Emma started leaving the supply closet door propped when she knew he'd be by, so he wouldn't have to juggle the key. She learned, without asking, that he preferred his coffee black, no sugar. Daniel never told her. She simply noticed what he left untouched on the tray the one time she'd guessed wrong. She thanked him sincerely every single time he cleared away the debris after her team's late meetings, using his first name, the false one, like it was a real one. He didn't expect it to matter. He definitely didn't expect his daughter to notice it first. There were other small tests that first month, ones nobody but Daniel would ever recognize as tests at all. A junior accountant named Marcus, barely 2 years out of college, held the elevator for him every single morning without fail, even when it meant being a minute late to his own desk. An older woman from the mailroom, Dolores, who'd worked at Hale Industries for over 20 years, always asked how his day was going and actually waited for the answer. These were not dramatic kindnesses. They cost nothing and meant everything, and Daniel began keeping a mental list of names, the way his mother had once told him a person's real character shows up in the smallest, cheapest gestures, the ones that cost nothing and are given anyway. He also began to notice the opposite pattern more clearly than he ever had from the other side of a boardroom table. The way certain executives spoke to junior staff changed entirely depending on who else was in the room. The way praise flowed uphill and blame flowed down. He had signed off on this company's culture for years without ever once seeing it from the floor. It was, he would later admit to his mother, the most useful business education he had ever received, and it hadn't cost the company a single dollar in consulting fees. Eleanor had insisted Lily stay home during work hours, but Daniel's after-school arrangements fell through in week 2, and rather than break the experiment or leave his daughter with a stranger, he made a quiet decision that surprised even him. On Fridays, Lily would sit in the small break room near the loading dock, coloring at a folding table, waiting for her father's shift to end. It was Emma who found her there first. "Well, hello," Emma said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "Who are you supervising today?" "My daddy," Lily said seriously, holding up a drawing of a stick figure in a gray shirt. "He cleans the whole building. He's really good at it. He's good at everything, actually." Emma laughed, delighted, and sat down across from her for a few minutes before her next meeting, asking about the drawing, about Lily's school, about her favorite color, the way adults ask children questions they don't actually expect thoughtful answers to. What Emma got instead was this: "My daddy used to be sad all the time after my mom went to heaven, but he's not as sad anymore. I think it's because of the coffee lady." Emma blinked. "The coffee lady? You?" Lily said, like it was obvious. "He talks about you at dinner." "Not a lot, but I notice." Emma didn't mention this to Daniel, but she started stopping by the break room more often on Fridays, and she started bringing 2 hot chocolates instead of 1. There was another child on the 14th floor that fall, though nobody would have guessed how much she'd end up matching. Ryan Cole's daughter, Maddie, was 8, and she sometimes came in on early release school days, parked in her father's office with a tablet while he took calls. One Friday, bored and wandering, Maddie found her way to the break room and discovered Lily building a cardboard fort out of supply boxes. The two girls became instant, uncomplicated friends, in the way only children manage. No last names exchanged, no assumptions made, just two kids stacking boxes into a castle. Neither of their fathers knew, for weeks, that their daughters were the one bright, uncorrupted friendship quietly growing at the center of a building full of adults keeping secrets from each other. Daniel, watching Emma and Lily from the doorway with a mop in his hand one Friday afternoon, felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't let himself feel in 2 years. It terrified him more than any hostile takeover he'd ever fought off in a boardroom. If you've ever fallen for someone through the way they treated your child, comment, "I know that feeling," below. 3 weeks in, Emma dropped a folder crossing the 14th floor hallway, and 24 technical drawings scattered across the marble like leaves. Daniel set down his cart and helped her gather them without thinking. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was glancing at one of the structural sheets while handing it back and saying, quietly, almost apologetically, "This load calculation doesn't match the spec on page 4. If it goes to construction like this, someone's going to have a very bad afternoon in about 6 months." Emma stared at him. "How would you know that?" "I read a lot," Daniel said, which was true if incomplete. She let it go. But she didn't forget it. And over the following weeks, small things kept happening that Emma couldn't quite explain. A jammed printer fixed 20 minutes before a client pitch, the toolkit borrowed from building maintenance left neatly back on its shelf afterward. A disconnected projector cable found and reconnected without anyone seeing who'd done it, traced behind a wall panel most people didn't know existed. A financial breakdown on her desk one morning with the errors quietly corrected and a short and signed note suggesting a cleaner way to present the numbers. The handwriting careful, deliberate, oddly familiar to the lettering on the daily cleaning logs by the supply closet. She never asked directly who was helping her. Some part of her had already started to suspect, and some part of her was afraid of what it would mean if she was right. It was Emma who finally suggested, almost on impulse, that they get dinner together after one particularly long evening, when both of them had stayed far past closing. She said it without hesitation, without the faintest concern that he was, by every visible measure, simply a member of the cleaning staff, because to her that distinction had never mattered in the first place. They ended up eating from a food cart parked near the office, sharing a paper tray balanced on a low stone wall, walking slowly through a light rain that neither of them seemed eager to escape. They talked about their families, about the small disappointments and quiet joys of ordinary life. Emma mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd once loved a man of considerable wealth, only to discover that everything he loved was ultimately himself, that his affection had never truly extended beyond his own reflection. She said she'd learned, painfully, that money could buy comfort but never character, and that she'd rather spend her life with someone honest and ordinary than with someone rich and hollow. Daniel said nothing for a long moment, the rain falling quietly around them, because he understood in that instant that Emma had just described, without knowing it, exactly the kind of woman he had spent his entire adult life searching for and never finding. Meanwhile, Ryan Cole's suspicion was curdling into something uglier. He'd noticed the same things Emma had. A janitor who understood finance, who spoke about architecture like he'd studied it, who once corrected a contractor's measurements without even looking up from his mop. Rather than wonder, Ryan decided to destroy. He hired a private investigator to dig into the background of a man he couldn't begin to understand, certain there was something to expose. The investigator found nothing. Eleanor's false employment file held. And that failure only made Ryan angrier, more convinced something was being hidden from him specifically. It happened almost by accident. Reorganizing the supply closet one evening, Daniel found an old metal toolbox shoved onto the top shelf, forgotten by whichever maintenance worker had used this closet years before his family's company ever expanded onto this floor. Tucked beneath a set of rusted screwdrivers was a small stack of photographs and a folded letter, water-stained at the corners. He almost didn't read it, but the handwriting on the envelope stopped him cold, round, looping, unmistakably his late wife's. Rachel had once worked, briefly, as a junior architect on the very renovation of this floor, years before she and Daniel had ever met, back when Hale Industries was still small enough that nobody batted an eye at a temp consultant borrowing a supply closet as a makeshift office. The letter, addressed to no one, dated 11 years earlier, was simply Rachel working through her own doubts about a career, about whether she belonged in a room full of people who assumed things about her based on her modest resume. Words that could have been written about Daniel's last 6 weeks, if he hadn't known better. "I keep waiting for someone to see the work instead of the woman doing it." One line read, "I think when that finally happens, I'll know I found the right room." He hadn't known she'd ever set foot in this building before they met. He hadn't known this closet had been, in some small forgotten way, hers first. Sitting on an overturned bucket with his late wife's handwriting in his hands, Daniel understood for the first time that this test wasn't only about Emma, or about the version of himself hidden under a gray uniform. It was about a question Rachel had asked in private, a decade before he'd ever had the courage to ask it himself. He didn't tell Emma about the letter. Not yet, but he kept it folded in his shirt pocket for the rest of his shift, and something about carrying it steadied him. If you've ever found something unexpected that helped you understand someone you'd lost, comment, "I understand," below. Security escorted Daniel from the building on a Wednesday morning, past a lobby full of employees who whispered that they'd always known something was off about the new guy. Ryan's plan had finally found its evidence. A set of missing client files, quietly planted in Daniel's supply closet the night before, discovered during a routine sweep that Ryan himself had requested. Lily, waiting in the break room with her coloring book, watched two men walk her father out like he'd done something wrong, and something in her small chest went cold and furious in a way that would matter more than anyone in that building yet understood. "He didn't do it," Lily said to the security guard, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "My daddy doesn't lie. Ever." No one listened to a 7-year-old. Except Emma. At an emergency department meeting called to address the missing files, Emma stood in front of colleagues who'd known her for years and said she believed, without a single shred of proof, that the new custodian was innocent. Several people laughed quietly. One senior manager suggested, not unkindly, that her judgment had been clouded. Emma didn't sit back down. "I've watched that man for 6 weeks," she said. "I know character when I see it. This isn't it." Ryan, sitting near the back of the room, allowed himself the smallest, most private smile, the first genuine satisfaction he'd felt in weeks. It didn't last. The truth came out 4 days later, when building security reviewed the after-hours footage and found Ryan Cole entering the design department at 11:40 p.m. on the night the files disappeared. A full 20 minutes before he'd claimed to have left the building. The same footage, reviewed a second time by a more thorough security officer, caught something else entirely. Ryan's daughter Maddie, waiting in the hallway outside her father's office that same night, visibly confused as he hurried past her toward the supply closet with a folder under his arm. When investigators quietly asked Maddie, weeks later and gently, whether she remembered that night, the 8-year-old, without any understanding of what her answer would mean, said simply that her dad had told her to wait by the elevator and not tell anyone she'd seen him go that way. It wasn't proof of malice. It was proof enough of everything else. Daniel was cleared. His job was reinstated. But something in him had gone quiet and watchful in a way it hadn't been before, because he understood now that Ryan's humiliation hadn't ended. It had only gone underground. Eleanor announced that Hale Industries would celebrate its 40th anniversary with a company-wide gala. Every employee invited, from the newest hire to the board. Daniel knew, the moment his mother told him the date, exactly what it meant. 19 days. That was how long the disguise had left to live. The weeks that followed felt, to Daniel, like borrowed time. He and Emma settled into an easy rhythm neither of them named out loud. Dinners after her shift ended, Lily drawing pictures at the same folding table while the two adults talked quietly nearby, Maddie occasionally joining after her own father's meetings ran long, the two girls' laughter the one unclouded sound in a building otherwise thick with tension. One evening, Emma asked him, almost carefully, What he'd do if he ever had the chance to start over completely. A different job, a different city, a clean slate. Daniel thought about the letter still folded in his shirt pocket, about Rachel's handwriting, about the question he still hadn't found the courage to ask. "I don't think I'd want a clean slate," he said finally. "I think I'd just want someone who already knew the whole story and stayed anyway." Emma didn't ask what that meant, but she remembered it later when it mattered most. 3 days before the gala, Ryan Cole, still simmering from his failed scheme, still unable to let it go, cornered Lily near the elevator bank while Daniel was on a different floor. "Your dad's not really a janitor, is he?" Ryan said, crouching down with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can tell me. I won't say anything." Lily, 7 years old and raised by a man who never once lied to her, looked Ryan Cole directly in the eye and said the only thing she knew for certain to be true. "My daddy is the best person I know. That's all you need to know about him." Then she walked straight to the security desk and asked them to call her grandmother. Eleanor arrived within the hour. When she heard what Ryan had done, cornering a child alone to extract information, something in her expression went very still and very cold. The look, long-time employees would later say, of a woman deciding a fight was already over. She sat down across from her granddaughter in the security office, folding her hands the way she did before every important negotiation of her career, and asked Lily gently to tell her exactly what had happened, word for word if she could remember it. Lily did, without embellishment, the way children often do when adults finally bother to ask properly. When she finished, Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You did exactly the right thing," she told her. "Do you know how many grown adults in this building wouldn't have had the courage to do what you just did?" "Is Ryan going to be in trouble?" Lily asked. "Ryan is going to learn that some things matter more than winning," Eleanor said. "That's a lesson some people don't learn until they're much, much older than me, if they learn it at all." Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, having been pulled from a different floor by a call he still didn't fully understand until he saw his daughter's face and knew, instantly, that something had happened that couldn't wait until his shift ended. He didn't say anything. He simply knelt down, wrapped his arms around her, and let her decide when she was ready to let go. If you've ever had someone try to use your child to get to you, tell us how you handled it below. The night of the gala, the 14th floor lobby had been transformed, string lights, a jazz trio, 40 years of company history glowing across screens along the walls. Emma moved through the crowd distracted, unable to explain why Daniel hadn't shown up for work in 3 days, why his cart had sat untouched by the supply closet, why no one seemed to know where he'd gone. She'd begun to fear, with a sadness she hadn't expected to feel so deeply, that whatever they'd shared during those quiet evenings had meant far less to him than it had come to mean to her. The outgoing CEO stepped onto the small stage and tapped the microphone. "Tonight, I have the honor of introducing the person who will carry this company into its next 40 years. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight rose. And standing in it, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, one hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl in a green velvet dress, was Daniel Hale. The recognition rippled through the room like a struck bell. Ryan Cole, holding a champagne glass near the bar, dropped it. The shatter was barely audible under the sound of 200 people gasping at once. Sophia Grant went pale, every man with the mop comment she'd ever made rising in her memory with sudden, mortifying weight. Eleanor stepped up beside her son and granddaughter, her voice carrying easily across the stunned room. 6 weeks ago, my son asked me a question I couldn't answer for him, she said. So I made him find the answer himself. Some of you failed that test badly. A few of you passed it without ever knowing you were being tested at all. Lily, holding her father's hand, leaned into the microphone before anyone could stop her. My daddy pushed a mop for 6 weeks and nobody was nice to him except Miss Emma, she announced to the entire ballroom in the clear, unfiltered voice only a 7-year-old can manage. So I think Miss Emma should get a promotion, and Ryan should say sorry. The room, somehow, both laughed and fell completely silent at once. Somewhere near the back, Maddie Cole tugged her father's sleeve and asked quietly why everyone was staring at them, and Ryan, for the first time in weeks, had no answer that didn't taste like shame. Emma stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, tears rising before she could stop them. Not joy, not yet, something closer to a held breath she didn't know she'd been holding for 6 weeks. Daniel found her later on the terrace, the party noise reduced to a distant hum, rain beginning to fall the same gentle way it had on the night, weeks earlier, when they'd shared food from a cart on a low stone wall and talked about nothing that mattered and everything that did. "I never once pretended to care about you," he said before she could ask. "That was the only thing I hid. My name. Nothing else. Why hide it at all?" Emma's voice trembled, more confused than angry now. Daniel told her about the marriage that had ended the moment the excitement of his wealth wore off, about women who'd learned his portfolio before they'd learned his birthday, about the particular loneliness of never knowing whether anyone's affection belonged to him or to the name on the building. Then he reached into his jacket and handed her the folded letter, water-stained at the corners. "I found this in the supply closet," he said. "It was my wife's. Before I ever met her, apparently, she worked a job in this exact building and wondered the same thing I did, whether anyone would ever see the work instead of the name attached to it." He paused. "I think some part of me has been trying to answer her question for 2 years without knowing it." Emma read the letter slowly, rain dotting the paper, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet in a way that had nothing to do with confusion anymore. "And Lily," Daniel added quietly, "has grown up watching people be kind to her because of who her grandmother is. I wanted her to see, just once, what it looks like when someone is kind to us for no reason at all. I wanted her to see you before she knew what a Hale was worth." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost to herself, "If you'd walked in wearing that suit on day 1, I never would have had the nerve to talk to you at all." She didn't pull her hand away when he reached for it. Inside, through the glass doors, Eleanor watched her son finally, truly found, and allowed herself the kind of smile she'd been saving for exactly this moment for 2 long years. Ryan Cole was dismissed within the month, the board citing not just the framed theft but a pattern of behavior, including cornering a child alone, that made the decision unanimous. He left quietly, without the confrontation he'd perhaps expected, and the last anyone saw of him in the building was Maddie's small hand in his as they crossed the lobby for the final time, the two of them walking past the same elevator bank where his scheme had first begun to unravel. Before he left, Eleanor called him into her office, not to gloat, but to say one thing plainly. "You have a daughter who told the truth without hesitation when it mattered. Learn something from her, Ryan, before it's too late to." He didn't respond, but he didn't forget it either. Sophia sought Daniel out privately to offer a sincere apology, admitting she judged a man she'd never once bothered to actually meet. Daniel accepted it with the same quiet grace he'd carried through 6 weeks of mopped floors, and chose not to pursue anything further. A decision that surprised many within the company who expected a very different response from a man wronged so publicly. In his first address as the newly named chief executive, he told the assembled leadership team that his time spent among the custodial staff had taught him something no business school or boardroom ever could, that he intended to build a company where every employee was treated with respect regardless of the title printed on their identification badge. "I spent 6 weeks being the least important person in this building," he said. "I want to build a company where that never happens to anyone, because nobody should have to disguise themselves to find out who actually sees them." Emma continued working within the design department exactly as she always had, refusing every offer of special treatment or accelerated promotion that came her way once her connection to the new chief executive became public knowledge, determined that her career would remain built entirely on her own talent and effort. Daniel admired this about her more than almost anything else, understanding that her refusal to take advantage of his position was simply further proof of the very quality that had drawn him to her in the first place. Lily and Maddie stayed friends, their small friendship the one thing that had never needed a last name to survive everything the adults around them had put it through. Their fathers, once separated by a scheme neither of them could take back, found an uneasy peace for the girl's sake. A birthday party attended, a school recital sat through in the same row, small gestures that never quite became friendship but never curdled back into hostility either. Lily got a new title of her own that the whole company adopted without irony. Chief Truth Officer. She still, to this day, tells anyone who'll listen that she was the one who figured it all out first. Nearly a year after that transformative gala evening, Daniel and Emma were married in a modest ceremony held in a quiet garden. The very place where he had once told her, during one of their earliest conversations, about the kind of life he had always dreamed of building with someone who loved him honestly. The wedding was small by the standards of a family worth billions, filled with close friends and colleagues, rather than business associates or society photographers. Exactly the kind of celebration Daniel had wanted since the earliest days of his disguise. Lily stood beside them holding the rings on a small velvet pillow she'd insisted on choosing herself, and refused, with great seriousness, to let anyone else carry it. Eleanor stood beside the couple during the ceremony, and at the appropriate moment, she presented Emma with a delicate heirloom ring that had been passed through the Hale family for generations, her voice thick with emotion as she spoke. From the very first day, Eleanor said, long before anyone else in that company understood who my son truly was, you had already recognized the value of the man himself. Long before you ever knew anything about the fortune that surrounded him. That is worth more than every dollar this family has ever made. Rachel's letter, the one Daniel had carried folded in his jacket for months, was framed quietly in his office afterward, not as a monument to grief, but as a reminder of the question that had started everything, whether anyone would ever see the work instead of the name attached to it. He believed, finally, that he had his answer. The story closes on a quiet, warm afternoon. Daniel and Emma walking together into the headquarters of Hale Industries, Lily skipping a few steps ahead of them with Maddie beside her, the two girls already planning their next cardboard fort. Daniel's hand rests gently around Emma's as they cross the lobby where their story first began. He pauses near the custodial staff working quietly along the corridor, stopping to shake each of their hands personally, thanking them sincerely for the months they unknowingly spent teaching him something about dignity that no title or fortune had ever managed to show him. Lily tugs on his sleeve and reminds him, as she does most mornings now, that he still owes the coffee machine on the 14th floor a proper thank you, since it started this whole thing in the first place. As the family continues on toward the elevators, the lesson of their story lingers gently behind them. A simple truth carried quietly through every hallway of that towering glass building, that real love begins the moment someone sees the true value of a person, long before they ever learn what that person owns. And sometimes it takes a child's plain honesty to make the rest of the room finally see it too. If this father earned your respect, comment respect below. If Lily stole your heart tonight, drop a red heart. We want to know she reached you too. And if you've ever sacrificed your own comfort for the sake of your family, we'd love to hear your story in the comments as well. If stories about quiet courage, family, and second chances mean something to you, subscribe because every week we tell another one worth staying up for.